Let's begin with a big idea from media theorist Marshall McLuhan. The world is becoming a global village. It was true in the 1970s, it's true now. That means we're in a more connected than ever world through travel, education, business, technology, and even our entertainment. But being connected doesn't always mean we understand one another. So imagine this: a business manager from Germany expects a direct conversation, but their Japanese colleague seems to be relying more on contextual understandings, being interpreted as maybe evasive or vague. A student from the US calls their professor by the first name, not realizing that in some cultures that's considered disrespectful. Or even consider that a healthcare provider in some cultures would consider eye contact as trustworthy or building some sort of rapport. But in a other culture where eye contact can be a sign of defiance, they may look away. These are small moments, but they create real tension, misinterpretation, even breakdowns in trust. So that's why we need intercultural communication and particularly competence, which is the ability to understand, respect, and adapt to cultural differences in communication. So in this presentation, I'll just walk us through a variety of things that happen in the first part of our textbook. Why intercultural communication matters, the relationship between communication and culture, the role of uncertainty and communication apprehension, 5 key truths about intercultural communication, how ethics and cultural values shape our decisions, cultural dimensions and microcultures, and finally, the role of physical environments in shaping how we connect. So let's start with why this matters in the first place. So first, let's consider the growing relevance of intercultural communication in our daily lives. Intercultural communication is the exchange of verbal and nonverbal messages between people from different cultural backgrounds. It's essential in workplaces, schools, healthcare settings, and even in casual social encounters. A little updated stat here: in the United States alone, over 47 million immigrants contribute to our growing cultural mosaic. It represents more than 14% of our population. So, what are the benefits? Well, for starters, stronger communities, broader economic development and opportunity, less conflict, and perhaps most importantly, personal growth through tolerance and expanded perspective. In short, intercultural communication isn't just something out there, it's happening all around and within us. So let's take a closer look at how communication and culture are fundamentally connected. So to understand intercultural communication, we first have to understand the nature of communication itself and how it's shaped by culture. Communication is dynamic, symbolic, and interactive. It's context dependent, which means that it's influenced by the people involved, the environment, and the culture surrounding it. It's also ubiquitous. There's no such thing as not communicating. Culture is also everywhere. It's learned, not innate. And yet it shapes everything: how we think, how we feel, how we behave, and how we communicate. Together, communication and culture form a feedback loop. Culture shapes communication, and communication reflects and reinforces culture. So, whenever we engage with someone from another culture, we're not just sharing words, we're navigating entire systems of meaning. And that often brings uncertainty. So, let's explore that next. Let's talk about what happens when we face the unknown, specifically the uncertainty that comes with intercultural interactions. When we meet someone from a culture different from our own, we may not know what's appropriate, what to say, how to behave, or even what gestures are respectful. Charles Berger, in accompaniment with Calabrese, they crafted the uncertainty reduction theory, which suggests that we're motivated to reduce this uncertainty in new interactions. Other scholars like William Goodiekunst and Young Kim argue that in intercultural settings, we often see the other person as a stranger, which also increases our anxiety. Uncertainty and anxiety are often kind of talked about within the same conversation, just different sides of the same coin. But in any case, this leads to intercultural communication apprehension, which is a specific kind of fear related to engaging across cultures. But importantly, how do we get better? That's what we all want to know, right? According to Brian Spitzberg, communication competence includes three aspects: a cognitive aspect, what we know, an affective aspect, which includes kind of our motivation, and thirdly, a behavioral aspect, which is our actual skills. And reducing anxiety and improving competence requires knowledge, self-awareness, and importantly, just practice. So next, we'll explore 5 core truths that help explain why intercultural communication is often so complicated and how to better navigate it. So here are 5 foundational ideas to guide your thinking about intercultural encounters. First, the message sent isn't always the message received. Culture adds noise to every interaction. We interpret messages through our cultural filters, and so do others. Secondly, nonverbal communication is primary. We often rely on eye contact, personal space, touch, and even silence, and all of these drastically change how messages are understood. Thirdly, communication styles often clash. Differences in directness, formality, and conversational norms can cause confusion or even offense. Fourthly, we tend to see people as cultural categories. So this just means that especially in early interactions, we may see someone as representing their culture rather than seeing them as an individual or their individuality. Fifthly, intercultural communication is a cycle. It includes stress, adaptation, and growth. It's a beautiful cycle, honestly. You make mistakes, but they're part of becoming a more competent communicator. These truths remind us that cultural differences are real and they're also manageable. So how we respond to them is shaped in part by our ethical approach. So how do we judge what's right or appropriate across cultures? Ethics are what provide a framework to guide us, and here are 5 major approaches along with a simplified question that kind of guides that approach. Some are related, have subtle differences, but here we go, at least according to the textbook. Firstly, the utilitarian approach. What does the most good for the most people? Secondly, there's a rights-based approach. What protects each person's freedom to choose what's right? Thirdly, a justice or fairness approach. Are people being treated equally and without favoritism? Fourthly, there's a common good approach, which kind of suffices to say what benefits our whole community. If we're all contributing, what should we all contribute to benefit the community? And fifthly, there's a virtue-based approach. What helps us become our best selves? So ethical intercultural communication means staying aware, reflective, and respectful. But importantly, it just gives us our frameworks as we start to do these intercultural interactions. And just to be clear, there isn't one size fits all in determining what's best or right or moral or ethical. But that aside, let's now explore how we can better understand culture by identifying its key dimensions and variations, of which there are many, and I'm only going to do a very surface overview of these. The textbook does a terrific job of giving you description and examples. I'll just give you the bigger ideas just to keep in our minds. So, not all cultures operate the same way, and researchers have identified some very key and important differences that I want you to keep in mind. So, cultural dimensions include individualism versus collectivism, of which there are vertical and horizontal varieties. There's also high versus low context communication. Also power distance, which is kind of a way of understanding hierarchies. Uncertainty avoidance is also a key dimension. Long-term versus short-term orientations. and then also value orientations. Beyond broad cultures, we also encounter microcultures like racial or ethnic groups, LGBTQ plus communities, religious minorities, people with disabilities, and others. And what I really appreciate about the research in this area is that there are ways of identifying microcultures, of which there are a few I'll share here. They have distinct values or traits, often experience marginalization or unequal power, and also they face barriers due to muted group dynamics, where their ways of communicating are not recognized by the dominant group. Now, recognizing both dominant and microcultural dynamics helps us listen better and engage more thoughtfully. But communication also happens in real physical space, and that matters too. And so that's why in this final part, let's talk about where communication happens. So the physical and environmental context is really interesting. Communication takes place in natural environments, which includes geography, climate, built environments, which involves architecture, layouts, furniture, and thirdly, perceptual environments, how we feel in a space. So Albert Morabian, who's a very legendary figure, especially in nonverbal communication, he says that we can compare environments by their information load, which is the amount of data we're processing. So high load environments increase uncertainty, and Edward T. Hall, also a giant in the field, identified 3 spatial zones: fixed feature space, walls, buildings; semi-fixed feature space, which includes the furniture, objects within the space; and then informal space, which is personal distances. And in addition to that, then there are 4 social distances, which include intimate, very close, personal, social, and public, each incrementally more distant or closer. And I also, just a little aside, I'm very curious how this may have changed even globally, if at all, post-pandemic, or whenever we are in a active, pathogen sort of scare. It kind of changes people's distances within one another. Anyway, quick aside. But back to the point here, cultures also vary in how they relate to time. This is always really fascinating to me, the difference between monochronic and polychronic cultures. Monochronic cultures value punctuality and schedules, whereas polychronic cultures value flexibility and, importantly, relational dynamics. But in summary, the environments we live and work in shape our comfort, our expectations, and our willingness to communicate. And there's ramifications across cultures in how we respond to both our natural environments, built environments, and the psychological landscape therein. So let's wrap up. We've explored what intercultural communication is, why it matters, and how it's shaped by culture, emotion, ethics, context, and space. And here's the takeaway. Intercultural communication is a skill. You're not born with it, but you can learn it. And by developing it, we open ourselves up to and create the fertile ground for stronger communities, broader economic opportunities, less conflict, and importantly, personal growth through tolerance and expanded perspective. So my encouragement always at the beginning of a course in intercultural communication is to stay curious, stay open, and at the very least, I want to leave you with a quote from Mother Teresa. Peace begins with a smile. The smile, in its most basic form, is widely considered a universal expression of happiness and friendliness that transcends linguistic barriers and connects individuals on a deeper level. So thanks for listening.